You are listening to the Doug Hagmann Radio Show, weekdays 9 to 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And now the man behind the mic, a private investigator with over 30 years under his belt, Doug Hagmann.
Good morning, everyone. It's 6 a.m. on the West Coast of America, 9 a.m. here in the East. Welcome to Hagmann. It's the Doug Hagmann Investigative Hour for today, Monday, October 15th, 2018, day 634 of the Donald J. Trump presidency. Did you watch 60 Minutes yesterday? If not, wow. Even despite the heavy edits, Donald Trump came out a clear winner in that, I'll say a debate, because it appeared, or it had the feel of a debate with Leslie Stahl, 60 Minutes interview. One thing stood out, and I'm not going to play any clips from that interview, but one thing stood out, and that's his reference to the media. And this is extremely important because if you, folks, I implore you, I beg you to listen until the end of this program, this episode, because I've got some information, historical information, as well as current information, tying both together, and it has a lot to do with the upcoming elections and information that I've received that it's starting to hit the media now, or it's starting to hit the new media with respect to the descriptive terms allowed in the media. Okay, so for example, we saw violence this weekend. Portland, New York City. Oh, you didn't hear about that? Oh, sure you. Well, no, maybe not. Portland, Oregon, violence. Antifa, violence. New York City, after Gavin McInnes spoke at the Republicans Club in New York City, there was violence. 3 Antifa members arrested. Portland again, more violence, but actually mayor-sanctioned violence. This is what you get when you have a sanctuary city. This is what you get when the locals, when you have a mayor, when you have the police chief. Now, I'm not saying this with any degree of absolute nature with respect to the police chief, but certainly a mayor giving stand-down orders to the police not to get involved. This is what this is why local elections have consequences and are so important. All elections have consequences, but this is why the money, the big money, has been infused into local races and judicial races as well. Now, in the 634 days Donald Trump has been president, we've seen 2 Supreme Court justices seated, 26 Circuit Court judges, 33 District Court judges, and an additional 15, I believe, over the weekend. So we are seeing now or last week, we're seeing now the filling of the vacancies that Obama did not fill, which is interesting. But that aside, let's look at the bigger picture here. And again, this is what we're seeing here is Donald Trump, I think, coming into his own stride right now, as shown even in the heavily edited 60 Minutes interview. Hey, I'm president, you're not, to Leslie Stahl. But this is, everything we're seeing right now is posturing ahead of the midterms. Whether it's on the right or on the left, it's posturing ahead of the midterms. The ban on the use of the word mob by the media. Now, I don't care whether it's Fox News or MSNBC. No, you can't use that word mob as it relates to the violence. The GOP just came out with a 57-second audio or video. I'm sorry, it's a video. 57 seconds. Wherein that video shows Hillary Clinton and others talking about the lack of civility. And, of course, Eric Holder kicked them. Hillary Clinton, we're not going to be civil until we regain power. And others advocating mob violence. But there are a couple of issues here. And, again, I'm going to tie all of these seemingly disparate points up into or at the end here. I want to mention something that Donald Trump said yesterday, and this was on Breitbart when Stahl asked President Trump about do you have any regrets? And the conversation moved to his discussing how the media has been vile and vicious to him. Now, this is critical because Note President Trump's both surprise and concern, and what he's telegraphing in this interview. Now, I'm going to give you some information here to tie things up and to show you what's really going on behind the veil. Go back to Davos. If you go back to the beginning of this year, the meeting in Davos, Switzerland, January 23rd, 24th, 25th, 26th. The meeting of all of the world leaders. More than 3,000 of the world's top bankers, business leaders, entrepreneurs, senior diplomats, heads of state from nearly 70 countries. Outside of that inner circle of billionaire elites, roamed a gaggle of pop stars and celebrities anxious to boost their activist credentials and mingle with the richest and most powerful people in the world. Now, again, this is in Davos. This is early this year. And the agenda included more than 400 sessions and panel discussions focusing on climate change and ecology of the oceans and technology, the internet, economic growth, and so on. The stated theme of the event was creating a shared future in a fractured world. But the overriding objective of this forum, as it has been every year since it began back in 1971, was building a consensus on how global elites can overcome the populist impulse and improve the state of the world. In other words, globalism. Okay, now, it seems like I'm throwing a bunch of stuff out here unrelated, but this all ties together. President Trump was not invited. He was not an official guest at first, but he went anyway. And the reason he went is because the United States is the most powerful nation on the planet. Our economy is like no other, and it was important for him to be there. The president told the Wall Street Journal that at that time that he was going to Davos as a cheerleader for the American economy. We don't need no stinking invitation. And to draw the attention to his administration's economic successes. Okay, so the president went to Davos. And it's interesting because he did begin his speech there. Yeah, they allowed him to speak. He started out by saying, "It's a privilege to be here at this forum, where leaders in business, science, art, diplomacy, and world affairs have gathered for many, many years to discuss how we can advance prosperity, security, and peace." But he said something else, too, that maybe didn't sit too well with this globalist agenda. He said, "I'm here today to represent the interests of the American people and to affirm America's friendship and partnership in building a better world." But he said that, well, he ended up, I'm not going to cite from the entire speech, obviously, but America first. Hey, we're the big boys on the block. It wasn't this Obama soy boy kind of posturing. No, he went there, he crashed the party. He said, it's America first. To hell with the globalists. It's America first. We are the big boys on the block. Now, that's the Donald Trump of the five boroughs. That's the Donald Trump of New York City. And his presence there, by the way, despite not being invited at first, it did bring a lot of enthusiastic people wanting autographs and selfies and such. It's interesting, too, because we had Stephen Strang on, who wrote Trump Aftershock, and it was at that meeting that someone handed President Trump an advance copy of Stephen Strang's book, and he held it up over his head for everyone to see. But anyway, He spoke about the press and about his treatment by the press. And consider January of this year, his remarks at Davos about his treatment by the press to what he said last night on 60 Minutes. And he said, at Davos, he said, as a businessman, I was always treated really well by the press. The numbers speak and things happen, but I've always had a good relationship with the press. And it wasn't until I became a politician I realized how nasty, how mean, how vicious, and how fake the press can be. Now, he said that at Davos, January of this year. He also said that to Leslie Stahl last night. Okay, midterms coming up. The optics surrounding what is taking place. Look at the press as the gatekeepers in the midterms, for the midterms. They will publish and present what they want while tanking what they don't want. In other words, anything that helps the socialist cause, they will promote. Anything helping or assisting the conservatives, obviously, they will quash. That's the press, that's the media, that's the dinosaur legacy media. We know that. But we've got right now the tech companies, as we see them, wiping out entire groups and pages. The very existence of movers and shakers in the social media realm with impunity. We've seen this over the weekend. We've seen this last week. It is now becoming more, it's more overt. It's more evident. Facebook, Twitter, just wiping accounts out in wholesale numbers. The reason they cannot fight on the facts. But anyway, back to President Trump, because this is what we are facing right now. We as a nation are facing. I'm going to get right to the heart of things. The remarks by President Trump back in January. There was a chorus of boos from members of the international press standing way in the back of the room after he said how vicious and vile the press is. Well, that continues today, except now the script is beginning to flip, where if you attend a Donald Trump rally and he mentions the fake news in the media and he points to the press in the back of the room or in the middle, depending on where they are at whatever venue, the boos are meant for the press, the media. Well, Victor Davis Hanson had written many columns about Donald Trump in the press, and he even remarked about his tweets and such. But one thing that was said, one thing that was written about Donald Trump, Trump may be an ego-driven and have proverbial thin skin, but even a rhino would finally chafe under 24/7 media, the way that he's treated by the media, the way his family's treated, and the office of the presidency is treated. Of course, I'm paraphrasing here. But what's driving all of this? Look, we understand the media. We understand pretty much what we can see. You've got to go back and take a look at what's really driving all of this. Think Hillary Clinton, how Clinton has been treated and Obama has been treated. Think about, compare. I guess just mentally compare. And obviously, I'm asking you to do this exercise because you've got to be in the right mindset to really, in my view at least, to understand the enemy and what they are doing and how they are doing it, because we can unveil this right now for everyone to see and identify the people behind this very easily. But again, we've got to get in that right mindset. And it's easy to forget how gingerly Obama was treated, and the same way with Hillary. Oh, you say something against Hillary, you're a misogynist. You say something against Obama, you are disrespectful, or you're a racist. Now, Donald Trump is fair game. And so, too, are any conservative candidates for the midterms. I'm going to be telling you a story here in a moment about an election not too long ago, last century, in America, that we should be taking a good hard look at and learning a lesson from. So just hold on and listen to me all the way through the end here. But first, we've got to really understand why the media is so aggressively anti-Donald Trump. So look at the far-left billionaires, from George Soros to Michael Bloomberg to Tom Steyer to the eBay founder Pierre Omidyar, I guess that's how you pronounce his name, Warren Buffett. They have been pouring huge amounts of money over the past 15 years, buying newspapers and funding websites and creating just this array of nonprofit advocacy groups to promote these liberal or these socialist policies to undermine conservatives and their organizations. I'm giving you the names here. Bloomberg, Michael Bloomberg, the former New York City mayor. Tom Steyer, the hedge fund manager, billionaire. eBay founder, Pierre Omidyar. I guess, again, that's how you pronounce his name. Warren Buffett. These are the people who have been buying real estate on the internet, buying newspapers and television networks. And yes, I'm familiar with the 6 corporations, but look at these men, look at these individuals. Look at the Media Research Center. And we have, for our flagship show, we have guests from the Media Research Center on all of the time. These billionaires, along with Soros' son, Jonathan Soros, they have spent more than $2.7 billion since the year 2000 to groups pushing abortion, climate change alarmism, and especially gun control. And they have been supporting a very long list of hand-picked liberal politicians or socialist politicians, many who will be or are running in the midterms for 2018. By himself, George Soros has spent at least $52 million, that's 52 million, building a network of newspapers, news organizations, and journalistic institutions. Now, this octopus, if you will, the tentacles, they're not limited to billionaires' connections to news organizations such as ABC and NBC and such, and New York Times, Washington Post. The Columbia Journalism Review has provided a very long list of investigative reporting projects funded by the Soros Foundations. And among them are activist groups such as ProPublica, the Center for Public Integrity, the Center for Investigative Reporting. All of these sound so great, don't they? And New Orleans The Lens, all funded in turn by the Soros-funded Open Society Foundations, plural, multiple foundations. The Columbia School of Journalism, which produces the CJR, they are considered, I should say, the journalistic gold standard when throughout history, throughout recent history. They've received at least $600,000 from George Soros and his foundations. It's the most renowned journalism school in the nation. That's not the only thing that Soros funds. He uses his fortune to influence the journalism industry and associations such as the National Federation of Community Broadcasters, the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, and the Committee to Protect Journalists. He supports the Organization of News Ombudsmen, which, by the way, lists 57 associate and retired members from periodicals and news organizations around the world, such as Deidre Edgar, the reader's representative of the Los Angeles Times, Brent Jones, standards editor for the USA Today, Kelly McBride, ombudsman for ESPN, Patrick Pexton, the ombudsman for the Washington Post. Now, a news ombudsman receives and investigates complaints from newspaper readers or listeners or viewers of radio and television stations about accuracy, fairness, balance, good taste in news coverage and such. Yeah. But anyone with the least amount of knowledge of Soros and his leftist agenda can only wonder about the group's objectivity and balance, of course. It's not. When you see fake news or questionable sources or questionable site on the Google apparatus, well, think about what I just said. Who is labeling that? I just gave you their names. And I gave you where the money is coming from. Now, Soros' money also goes to the Investigative News Network and the James Knight Foundation, which has offices in 8 cities, 8 large and mid-sized cities, and 18 smaller ones. And they are associated with the former Knight chain of newspapers, Knight. Remember Knight Ridder, Knight, James L. Knight Foundation. Warren Buffett. Now, people think of him as your friendly neighborhood billionaire. He is one of the most aggressively liberal portfolios in the nation, and Buffett began buying up small and mid-sized newspapers really in earnest starting back in 2012. It began sooner, but that's really when he put the pedal to the metal, spending millions of dollars on an industry that most people believed was dying. You know, why buy newspapers? It's a dying industry. But he cornered the market, or is trying to corner the market. This is Warren Buffett. 46 of the 75 papers he owned as of July 2014, this according to MRC, were strategically located in crucial swing states: Iowa, Virginia, North Carolina, and Florida. Then there's the Susan Thompson Buffett Foundation, which happens to be named for his late wife. That foundation donated at least $1.2 billion with a B to support abortion, infanticide, worldwide. Okay, I'm going to say that one more time. I'm looking at my notes here, and I'm thinking, okay, do people really understand that the immense nature of this? Warren Buffett, who the guy who started really buying up newspapers in a dying industry, the print media. Again, 46 of the 75 papers he owned as of July of 2014, this according to MRC, were strategically located in swing states, very crucial swing states: Iowa, Virginia, North Carolina, and Florida. And then we've got the Susan Thompson Buffett Foundation, as I mentioned, named for his late wife, donated at least $1.2 billion with a B to support infanticide, the killing of unborn children. And how do these numbers play out? Planned Parenthood received $289 million. Marie Stopes International, $211 million. That's for abortion and contraception. National Abortion Federation, $85 million. Oh, and the condom industry, DKT International, $78 million. I'm kind of in favor of that. I don't like to see procreation of the socialists, but that's just me. Engender Health, $32 million. That's dedicated to vasectomies for guys. Again, if you're soy, go ahead. Please don't procreate. NARAL, N-A-R-A-L, you know that, the abortion activist group, $24 million. Now, let's move on. Tom Steyer, this radical environmentalist, got together with the younger Soros, Jonathan Soros. They funded liberal news-related websites. Center for Public Integrity, Media Matters, Center for Eco-Literacy, and the Center for American Progress. You know that. Steyer, he's got a super PAC, spent nearly $100 million to support the Democratic Socialists during the 2016 campaign. Steyer is also tossing out, and to date has tossed out, some $20 million for a national need to impeach advertising campaign. You see the billboards and signs everywhere, not everywhere, but in various places. Impeach 45, impeach Donald Trump. That's Steyer. That's Tom Steyer, along with the younger Soros, the spawn of George Soros. That, a lot of people are looking at Tom Steyer and saying, I wonder if perhaps this is his first bid or his bid for a 2020 run. But these are just a few of the billionaire radicals who are working to undermine President Donald Trump. The undermining of President Trump, as we don't see it and is not talked about, these people are controlling the media. They've got the money to do so. You don't like what's being written in the newspaper, you buy it. And then you control what's being written in the newspaper. Same with TV. Oh, and the websites? We're going to buy domains. We're going to populate those domains with information that's critical to the conservative causes, pro-socialist propaganda. And then we're going to pay, we're going to pay Google, the silicon giants, the tech companies, to censor conservative views. This is what we're seeing right now, and it is ramping up ahead of the midterms. Look, our flagship show, out of the blue, out of nowhere, on YouTube, where numbers are, folks, you would not believe the numbers on our flagship show. You would not believe our reach. In fact, we have, and this is not to say yay is us, but we've had publicists and agents for various individuals who have written books contact us and say, can we please get on your show? Because we've been on various other programs and haven't had nearly the response that your program has given us. Can we come back on? And just at the height of that, and of course, we are a conservative, pro-constitutional platform. And at the height of that, the numbers, YouTube came out and said, nope, you violated our terms of service. We're not going to tell you what terms of service, but you will not be able to live stream for 90 days or until after the midterms. They didn't say after the midterms, but that's the way it was. Now, we have not yet been censored, except for being shadow banned on the socials. We're being shadow banned. However, we're still there. We still have a presence there. And I'll just say this: we're doing some things to see if we can't keep a presence there, only because we need to use every tool available, even the tools of the enemy, against them. Which is why I ask people to follow Hagmann Report on Facebook and Hagmann Report on Twitter, as well as even my own, at Hagmann PI. It's kind of a backup. That's at Hagmann PI on Twitter and Douglas.Hagmann on Facebook. It's kind of a backup, and things are being done very methodically there. That's all I'm going to say. Very methodically. But now, hold that thought, because don't hold that thought. Let me just recap here. Last night, President Trump made it a big point that, you got any regrets? Well, yeah, I regret the way the press treated me. Now, he could have answered that question in any way he wanted. I regret not having the wall built by now. I regret whatever. But he selected the press treatment of him. And that's not the only time he did it. As I mentioned, he did it in Davos back in January. He is telling us about the way the media, obviously, is a fifth column that, of course, we already know this. reinforcing the socialist agenda. What I told you now is how Tom Steyer, for one, Warren Buffett and others are buying the print media and buying real estate on the internet in order to drown out and to ultimately censor conservatives and push the socialist agenda. I'm seeing this, by the way, through emails and private messages on our socials. But that aside, so we'll just combine those two and think about that message as it goes through. And by the way, as an aside, this is totally as an aside and not really related to what we're talking about. It's interesting because Breitbart just reported, I believe it was Breitbart, reported on 2 assassination attempts against President Trump that never really made it to the news or the mainstream media. Perhaps that's a good thing, I don't know. But I thought that was interesting as I was researching for this show. All right, now we have the midterms coming up. I'm going to get back to what I'm talking about here, but just now hold that thought. Now we have the midterms coming up. And we see, of course, what have we seen? We've seen violence everywhere in the big cities. Antifa against the conservatives and the police being told to stand down by the mayors of the various cities. How is this going to end? Has this ever happened in the past? Come with me to 1946. I got a story to tell you. We can learn from this. Again, 1946. That's the time. The location, McMinn County, Tennessee. Specifically, the town, the city of Athens, Tennessee. McMinn County, Tennessee, in the early 40s, was a farming community. Athens was the county seat, is the county seat of McMinn County, Tennessee. It sits right between Knoxville, Tennessee, and Chattanooga along U.S. Highway 11. And back in the 40s, this was the meeting place for farmers from all the surrounding communities. All right. Since the Civil War, political offices in McMinn County had gone to the Republicans. But in 1930s Tennessee, they began to fall under the control of Democratic bosses. And to the west in Shelby County, E.H. Crump, the Memphis mayor, who had been ousted during his term for failing to enforce prohibition, fathered what would be the state's most powerful political machine. Now, E.H. Crump eventually controlled most of Tennessee, along with the governor's office and the United States senator. In eastern Tennessee, local and regional machines developed, which, lacking the sophistication and power of this E.H. Crump, of our Crump machine, relied on intimidation and violence to control their constituents. In 1936, the system descended upon McMinn County in the person of a guy by the name of Paul Cantrell. He was the Democratic candidate for sheriff. Now, Cantrell came from a family of money and influence in nearby Etowah. He tied his campaign closely to the popularity of FDR and rode FDR's coattails to victory over his Republican opponent. Again, we're talking 1940s, McMinn County, Tennessee, Athens, the county seat. Now, with respect to this Cantrell, fraud was suspected. Many people in Athens, the county seat, firmly believed that the ballot boxes were swapped, but there was no proof. And over the following months and years, those who questioned the election would see their suspicions vindicated. The laws of Tennessee, they did provide an opportunity for the unscrupulous to prosper. And the sheriff, by the way, and his deputies received a fee for every person they booked, incarcerated, and released. The more human transactions, the more money they got. A voucher signed by the sheriff was all that was needed to collect money from the courthouse. And deputies, they would drag anybody from any place. They often boarded buses traveling through and grabbed passengers and said, "Oh, you're drunk and disorderly, so you've got to pay your $16.50 fine for drunkenness, whether they were drunk or not. Many weekends, the number of arrests topped 100, over 100, 115 per weekend. And that was pretty profitable. But record keeping was required, and the money could be traced. It was much less troublesome to collect kickbacks for allowing roadhouses to operate openly as well. So cooperative owners would point out influential patrons. Those people were not bothered from those roadhouses. But the rest were subject to shakedowns. Ultimately, prostitution, liquor, and gambling grew so prevalent that it became common knowledge in Tennessee that Athens was wide open. So, encouraged by his initial successes, this Paul Cantrell began what would become a 10-year reign as the king of McMinn politics. Now, in subsequent elections, ballot boxes were collected from the precincts and the results tabulated in secret at the McMinn County Jail in Athens. Opposition poll watchers were labeled as troublemakers and were tossed out of the precinct houses. You get out of here. Follow me on this because, again, think of the midterms coming up. And think, too, of the elections back in 2008 and 12. Remember the Black Panthers? But I digress. Just keep all of this in the back of your mind. But anyway, 1940. The 1940 election sent a guy by the name of George Woods, a crony of Paul Cantrell, to the state legislature. Now, Woods promptly introduced an act to redistrict McMinn County. What this did was it reduced the number of voting precincts from 23 to 12, and it cut down the number of justices of the peace from 14 to 7. And of those 7, 4 were openly Cantrell guys. Now, when Governor Prentice Cooper signed Woods' bill into law, this on February 15th, 1941, any kind of Republican opposition, it died in McMinn County. McMinn County Court, which was still dominated by Republicans, directed the county to purchase voting machines. The Cantrell Democrats countered by having Woods get a bill passed in Nashville, abolishing the court and then selling the machines to save the county money, ostensibly. Department of Justice records show investigations of electoral fraud in McMinn County in 1940, 1942, and 1944, all without resolution. Now, I'll mention this as part of a backdrop. It was during the Civil War. McMinn County had sided with the Union. In 1898, McMinn County declared war on Spain 2 weeks before Washington got around to it. But anyway, so how could Cantrell have such undisputed control over a county noted for its independent and cantankerous spirit? Well, one of the answers exists in the Second World War, because there were 3,526 young men, or about 10% of McMinn's population. They went off to fight in the Second World War. Most of those left behind, older, maybe more timid, they contributed to the Cantrell's machine, that machine's growth, by staying silent. Still, as the war dragged on, people were telling each other in McMinn County, just wait until the GIs get back. Things are going to be different. Again, think today. Put this example, use this as a template for what's going on today. Obviously, it's not the same. We're not fighting a war overseas. We're not having vast numbers of GIs out here. But again, think bigger. Okay. So it was back in the summer of 45 when veterans began returning back to McMinn County. By 1946, Athens, well, there were uniforms everywhere, men coming home from the war. Now, the Cantrell forces, they were not worried. There was one guy that came home from overseas, a guy by the name of Bill White. He said there were several beer joints and honky-tonks around Athens. We were pretty wild. We started having trouble with the law enforcement at that time because they started making a habit of picking up GIs and finding them heavily for most anything. They were kind of making a racket out of it. After long, hard years of fighting and battle and service, Most of us were hardcore veterans of World War II. We were used to drinking our liquor and our beer without being molested. So when these things happened, the GIs, they got PO'd, man. And the more GIs they arrested, the more they beat up, the madder we got. Again, think today. Different circumstances, but just think today. At last, the veterans chose to use the most basic right of all of our rights in this country, for which they had gone to war, the right to vote. It was in the early months of 1946. They decided in secret meetings to field a slate of their own candidates for the August elections. So in May, they formed a nonpartisan political party. And as the elections approached, there were a few overt signs of impending trouble. Although to the citizens of McMinn County, it was apparent that something had to happen, there was just too much at stake for both sides. So, enter the newspaper, the Daily Post-Athenian. Nothing was written about anything. The most significant news item appeared on election eve, July 31st, 1946, at the bottom of page 1. VFW members in neighboring Blount County said that 450 veterans were ready to respond to any need in McMinn County. Yeah, that was way below the fold, and way below an article about some guy killing a muskrat in his front yard, okay? That's how below the fold it was. So this silent opposition of veterans, they fielded candidates for 5 offices. But the primary race that they were so concerned about was the race for sheriff between a guy by the name of Knox Henry, who had served in the North African campaign overseas, and Paul Cantrell, the bad guy. And since the 36th election, Cantrell had gone on to legislator as state senator and installed Pat Mansfield as sheriff of McMinn County. Pat Mansfield is this jovial engineer for the Louisville and Nashville. Anyway, Mansfield had done a pretty good job for himself during his term of office. His 4 years as sheriff netted him an estimated $104,000. That's when $100,000 was a lot of money back in the 1940s. But now in 1946, Cantrell was running for sheriff and Mansfield for state senator. Here it is. In the final week, there were a flurry of advertisements that appeared in the Post-Athenian. Cantrell enumerated all of the accomplishments of the Democratic Party. Mansfield denied that, by the way, that 2 men arrested on July 30th with a shipment of liquor were deputies. There was some liquor that was coming in during this time. Anyway, just think about the rampant corruption. So the election was looming. Downtown merchants announced that all stores would be closed on Election Day to give employees a chance to vote, although that had not been necessary in previous elections. The merchants, by the way, were perhaps following the example of Mayor of Athens, Paul Walker. He would be vacationing on Election Day, and Cantrell warned that the veterans had printed simple ballots with the intention of stuffing ballot boxes. The veterans offered a $1,000 reward for verifiable information about election fraud, and repeated a slogan that for weeks had sounded again and again from car-mounted loudspeakers: "Your vote will be counted as cast." Now, it was 2 days before the election. The GIs ran an advertisement in the Post-Athenian. These young men fought and won a war for good government. They know what it takes and what it means to have a clean government. And they're energetic enough, honest enough, and intelligent enough to give us good, clean government. A couple of pages further on, the Democrats had their say. Look at the facts, and you will vote for a Democratic ticket. The campaign fight is as old as the hills. It is the story of the outs wanting back in. That's part of the campaign ad. Anyway, the Democratic campaign ad. But the next day, the paper reported that veterans from Blount County had offered to come help watch the polls. And this is where the trouble begins. And again, it's not who votes necessarily, it's who counts the votes sometimes. Now, I'm talking about, again, those people just joining me, McMinn County, Tennessee, 1946 elections. Compare this to what's taking place today. You'll have to replace certain elements with others, but you get the idea. Right before the election, the paper reported that veterans from Blount County had offered to come in to watch the polls, to be observers. Mansfield began building an army of his own. It's come to my attention, he announced, that certain elements intend to create a disturbance at and around the polls. And in order to see that law and order is maintained, I will have several hundred deputies patrolling the county. He hired all of them from outside of the county. Think about that. Think about that. Some from out of state. Again, think about that too. They would crowd inside every voting precinct, and they would be armed. So, Election Day, August 1st, 1946, McMinn County, Tennessee. Voters lining up early, the largest turnout in local history. This is Republicans versus Democrats. Democrats took control, in a nutshell, took control over McMinn County. The sheriff, everyone on the Democratic side, horrifically corrupt. Veterans coming back from World War II, setting up their own party, saying, okay, we are going to correct this at the polls. So August 1st, people began lining up at the polls, at the voting booths. Largest turnout in local history. Joining them were some 300 of Sheriff Mansfield's special deputies. Trouble began early. It was at 9:30 in the morning. Walter Ellis, a legally appointed GI representative at the 1st Precinct in the courthouse, was arrested and jailed for protesting irregularities. All right, so then you had sirens wailing throughout the morning and police cruisers seen speeding toward the jail. GIs began gathering on Washington Street outside of the local jewelry store, which served as an office for their campaign manager, a guy by the name of Jim Buttram, who had seen action during the Second World War in Africa, Sicily, Italy, Normandy. But above the jewelry store door, a sign read, "Phone 787 Jim Buttram," the number to which voters were to report election fraud. Well, there were people pounding on his door. You open his door. As more than 200 GIs filled the small store, the somber mood of their leader told them that they were in trouble. He showed them copies of 2 telegrams dated July 22nd. One he had addressed to Governor Jim McCord of Nashville, and the other to Attorney General Tom Clark of Washington. They asked for assistance to ensure a fair election, but got no answer. This is when you call 911 and you don't get an answer. Otto Kennedy, not an ex-GI himself, but a political advisor to the veterans, he walked in the office and announced that Cantrell had posted armed guards at each precinct. They all knew that this move was in preparation for the 4 o'clock poll closing, when the ballot boxes would be moved to the jail for counting. As I mentioned, they were counted in secret at the jail. A small group of veterans demanded an armed mobilization and called for a leader. Buttram said, no, declined. So did Kennedy. But he offered the rear of his tire shop and garage as across the street as a meeting hall. And the group crossed the street and held a meeting and agreed that those who did not have weapons should go get them. You got a gun? Go get it. It's on, baby. This is when men were men and not soy boys. And I will say this. You have a time today when the Antifa thugs, these soy boy, green behind the ears, zit-faced idiots, lobotomized liberals are out there just poking at these men. And the men, that's us. We're sitting, we're watching, we're observing, but we're strategizing. McMinn County, Tennessee. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, back at the tire shop and garage, they reassembled. Most of them were armed. About this time, Tom Gillespie, an older black farmer from nearby, stepped inside the 11th Precinct polling place in Athens, in the Athens Waterworks on Jackson Street. Windy Wise, a Cantrell guard, told Gillespie, using the N-word, I'm not going to say it, you can't vote here. When Tom protested, Wise struck him with brass knuckles. Oh my, how things never change. Gillespie dropped his ballot, ran for the door. Wise pulled a pistol and shot him in the back just as he reached the sidewalk. Now, the first shot of the day brought crowds streaming up from Jackson Street from the courthouse. Sheriff Mansfield's cruiser screeching to a halt in front of Waterworks. Deputies loaded the bleeding Gillespie into the car. Mansfield ordered the precinct close and 4 deputies outside to guard the Waterworks, and then took Gillespie to a hospital. No, he didn't. They took him to jail. A dozen veterans from the gas station or service station started up Jackson Street toward the Waterworks. They were unarmed. There was some confusion following the shooting. 2 GI poll watchers, Ed Vestel and Charles Scott, they had been seized and held hostage inside Waterworks by Wise and another Cantrell deputy Carl Neal. When the veterans reached the Waterworks, the crowd began taunting the armed guards as Wise and Neal stood at the window watching this angry throng outside. Vestal and Scott plunged through the plate glass windows and ran bleeding for the protection of the crowd. Wise stepped through the broken glass, waving his pistol. At that moment, several veterans rushed forward, but they were quickly pulled back to safety, one of them shouting, "Let's go get our guns." And they left for the garage. In the meanwhile, Chief Deputy Bo Dunn had his men form a cordon from the building to his cruiser, and the ballot box was carried to the car. Wise told Dunn about the GI's threat. The chief deputy ordered 2 of his men to GI headquarters to arrest those who Wise could identify. The rest of the deputies pulled into the cruiser, sped back to the jail. Anyway, when the 2 deputies reached the GI headquarters, that in the service station garage I was talking about, they were disarmed and taken prisoner. When the 2 deputies reached that headquarters, the GI headquarters in the service station area, they were disarmed and they were taken prisoner. So were the 2 others, who were sent later as reinforcements. A crowd began to gather outside. 3 more deputies came with pistols drawn, only to be just pummeled and dragged inside. The crowd began to demand the lives of the captives. Some of the veterans agreed. Anyway, there were other locations, other polling places within McMinn County, Tennessee. Virtually similar things happened. The Cantrell forces, however, and I'm kind of cutting this short, it calculated that if they can control the 1st, 11th, and 12th precincts in Athens and 1 in Etowah, the election was theirs. The ballot boxes from the Waterworks, the 11th, and Dixie Cafe, the 12th, were safely in the jail. The voting place for the 1st precinct, the courthouse, was barricaded by deputies who held the 4 GIs hostage, and Paul Cantrell himself had Etowah under control. So it was by 6 o'clock. Everything seemed to be over. The garage that had the GI headquarters, the headquarters, it was deserted. Unhappy crowds moved quietly along the streets. Another election had been stolen, and nothing could be done about it. Right? Okay. An interesting side note, at the Strand movie theater across from the courthouse, the marquee read, "Coming soon, gunning for vengeance." Interesting story, by the way. Bill White, and I'm going to toss his name in here and then move quickly forward. He had fought in the Pacific while still in his teens. He came home as an ex-sergeant. He'd watched all this, and he got PO'd, more PO'd as the day went on. He said, you guys call yourself GIs. You go over there and you fight, or meaning overseas, you fight for 4 years. You come back here and you let a bunch of draft dodgers, it's soy boys, and I'm putting words in his mouth now, who stayed here where it was safe, and you're making it safe for them. They push you around. If you guys don't stop this right now, you people wouldn't make a pimple on a fighting GI's butt. Get guns. Get them now. Here's the story. At the end of the day, and I mean literally at the end of the day and into the next, the forces of the constitutionalists, shall we say, the people who were fighting on the side of conservative and freedom and for free elections, they won the day. They took their guns. They took dynamite. They attacked and overtook the jail. Yeah, this is in 1946 in Tennessee, in the United States. 10 years of suppressed rage exploded. And I'm going to tell you, they kicked butt. They kicked butt. They made their way through they destroyed basically everything. Kind of like Antifa, pushing and pushing and pushing, and the conservatives all of a sudden fighting back and just laid them to waste. How? Guns, our Second Amendment right. Bottom line, this was hardly reported anywhere in the newspapers, anywhere in the media. In fact, it was ultimately it was misreported, but I digress because time is short. Here's the bottom line. McMinn County, Tennessee, 1946. The day was won by people who took it and took it and took it and took it and said, you know what, I ain't going to take this anymore. And the corrupted officials were overthrown by popular or by vote, and it had to be done using our Second Amendment rights. Now that's, folks, I would urge you to read about the Battle of Athens, 1946, Athens, Tennessee. The reason I brought this up, it mirrors exactly what's going on today. I submit to you, the Battle of Athens, 1946, is just a microcosm of what we are going to see in the near term. This is why the elections, by the way, the midterm elections are so important. We've got to get the corrupt officials out of there. If not, this is why we have the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment. This is the real purpose for the Second Amendment, to protect, obviously, the First. You can see it coming. If you take the Battle of Athens, small scale, and apply it to today, or look through the lens of that particular historical hinge moment in time, you will see, at least in my view, what is coming around the corner. So you need to prepare. You need to pray, but you need to be organized. We all need to be organized. And we all need to understand that we can't sit on our butts on a couch. You cannot be co-opted by the corrupt system. We have to act. So, as you're seeing the media not report on the violence that's taking place by the Antifa thugs, and as you see the media being purchased in wholesale lots, many parts of the media, print and the real estate on the internet being purchased by these billionaire radicals, and as you're seeing people like Leslie Stahl ask Donald Trump what his biggest regrets, or what his regrets, do you have any regrets? Yeah, I regret the way that media has been treating me. Think the Battle of Athens. The media played a role in that as much as the corrupt machinery played a role in that. This, I believe we are going to see the Battle of Athens reoccur in a larger scale, because you can only push the conservative for so long. And I'm not advocating violence. This is an observation. But I will say this, prepare, because it's coming. Whether it's Antifa, whether it's the billionaire radicals who are funding this corruption, as well as this media censorship, it's coming. And yet, by the way, when you go into Athens today, you'll see a sign that says, "Welcome to Friendly Athens," or "Welcome to Athens, the Friendly City." Folks, I hope this made sense to you. I hope that accounting of that battle, I hope that rings a bell. Look into it. God bless. See you later.
The Doug Hagmann Radio Show is brought to you by the Hagmann Report. Tune in to the Hagmann Report weekdays, 7 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. For more information, go to HagmannReport.com. That's HagmannReport.com.